They told me I was about to save my son's life, but deep down I felt like I was walking into my own grave. I lay on that operating table, the lights blinding, the air cold, and all I could hear was my daughter-in-law's voice telling me it was my duty, like I was nothing more than spare parts. My hands shook as I prayed, not for myself but for Daniel, and for the little girl I was leaving behind. Then just when the mask touched my face I heard Lila's voice, my 10-year-old granddaughter, screaming the truth that would change everything. In that moment, the walls of that hospital room became a battlefield of life, death, and betrayal. If you're hearing my story right now, don't forget to subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Your voice matters, and I want to know how far my story travels. My name is Margaret Willis, and I'm 68 years old. I live in Savannah, Georgia, though these days, it feels less like a home and more like a memory I wander through alone. The cobblestone streets, the Spanish moss hanging heavy from the oak trees, the soft sound of the riverboats, they all used to comfort me. They reminded me of my husband, Harold, and the years we built together before death took him too soon. But lately, when I step outside my porch and look at those same streets, I feel a hollowness in my chest. I gave so much of myself to my family that somewhere along the way I stopped belonging to myself. I had only one child, my son Daniel. He was the apple of my eye from the day he was born. I raised him mostly on my own after Harold passed in his 40s. I was in my mid-30s then, still young, still strong, but grieving and scared of how I would raise a boy into a man without his father's steady hand. I worked 2 jobs. Mornings at a diner pouring coffee for regulars who never tipped well, and nights cleaning offices downtown where no one knew my name. Every dollar I earned went into keeping Daniel clothed, fed, and educated. I gave up vacations, new clothes, even simple luxuries like going to the movies, just to make sure Daniel had a chance at the life Harold would have wanted for him. I don't say this to boast. I say it because sacrifice has been the story of my life. And when you sacrifice everything for your child, you start to believe, maybe foolishly, that the love you poured out will be poured back one day. You think they'll remember the nights you stayed up sewing holes in shoes, or the mornings you walked them to school in the pouring rain because you couldn't afford a car. But life doesn't always work that way. Sometimes the people you love most forget the price you paid to give them everything. Daniel grew into a fine young man, or so I thought. He went off to college on a scholarship, but it was me who scraped together the money for what the scholarship didn't cover. I even co-signed his first mortgage when he and Vanessa, his wife, bought their home on the edge of town. That nearly drained my retirement fund, but I told myself it was worth it to see him happy. Vanessa was always polite in front of others, but behind closed doors she had a way of making me feel like a guest in my own family. She had a sharp tongue and her words cut in small ways. She'd make comments about my clothes being outdated, about how I hovered too much around Lila, their daughter. She never said thank you when I watched Lila after school, even though I rearranged my life to do it. So I stayed quiet, for Daniel's sake. And then came the day when everything shifted. Daniel fell ill. At first it was fatigue, then swelling in his legs, then sudden hospital stays. I remember the sound of the doctor's voice when he said, "Kidney failure." It echoed in my head like a church bell. My boy, the child I had sacrificed my whole life for, was fighting to survive, and the only solution was a transplant. The tests came back and I was the closest match. I can't describe the feeling, relief and fear tangled together like storm clouds. Relief that I could help him. Fear that at my age 68 my body might not withstand the knife. I wanted time to think, time to pray, but Vanessa didn't give me that space. She looked me dead in the eye, her voice cold as steel, and said, "It's your duty, Margaret. You're his mother. What else are you here for?" Those words, they've never left me. In that moment I felt less like a human being and more like a body on loan, waiting to be carved open. I glanced at Daniel lying in that hospital bed, too weak to speak, his eyes closed. He didn't defend me. He didn't say, "Mama, don't feel pressured." He just stayed silent. That silence hurt almost as much as Vanessa's words. And that's how I found myself where I am now, on a hospital bed of my own, dressed in a thin gown, shivering under the bright lights. My heart races with every beep of the monitor, every shuffle of nurses' shoes on the polished floor. I can hear the faint hum of the air conditioning, the hiss of oxygen tanks nearby. It all feels cold, mechanical, detached from the humanity of what is about to happen. I close my eyes and see Harold's face, and I wonder if I'll be meeting him again sooner than I planned. But what no one in that room knows is that a storm is brewing just outside the door. My granddaughter Lila, my sweet 10-year-old with her wide brown eyes and stubborn spirit, has seen something. She's holding a truth in her small hands that even I don't fully understand yet. And in just a few moments, that truth will crash into this sterile, silent room and change everything. I didn't know it then, but the scalpel wasn't the sharpest thing waiting to cut me open that day. It was betrayal from inside my own family. And it was about to bleed me dry. Before all of this, before the hospital and the bright white lights, my life had a rhythm. Not an easy rhythm, but one I had grown used to. Savannah is the kind of city where the past lingers in the air. The houses lean with history and the trees carry stories in their moss. I used to sit on my porch at dusk, rocking in Harold's old chair, and watch the sun dip behind the rooftops. That chair creaked like it carried all my secrets, and maybe it did. I would close my eyes and listen to the cicadas singing in the heat, and for a moment I could almost pretend life was gentle. But the truth was, I hadn't lived for myself in decades. My life was stitched together with Daniel's needs. When Harold died, it was like the floor vanished beneath me. I was left standing on air, holding a little boy's hand, promising him I'd never let him fall. And I didn't. Every bill I paid, every job I took, every night I lay awake sewing patches on jeans or stretching soup to last another day, it was all for him. When Daniel grew older, I told myself I'd finally breathe. But breathing doesn't come easy when your whole identity has been sacrificed. I watched him graduate and pride swelled in me like a tide. I thought maybe, just maybe, the years of scraping by were worth it. I imagined he'd turn to me and say, "Mama, you can rest now. I'll take care of you." But those words never came. Instead, he slipped further into Vanessa's world, and I became something like wallpaper, present but unseen. Vanessa was beautiful, I'll give her that. Sharp cheekbones, a wardrobe that looked like it came straight out of a magazine, and a smile that could charm anyone except me. Behind closed doors, her smile melted into something sharper. I'll never forget the first time she snapped at me. It was over something small. I'd bought Lila a dress without asking. Vanessa looked at me like I'd committed a crime, her voice low and venomous. "Don't overstep, Margaret. You had your time raising kids. This one is mine." Those words stung, but I swallowed them. For Daniel's sake. For Lila's sake. Isn't that what mothers always do? We bite our tongues until they bleed just to keep the peace. But bleeding tongues can't hold back the truth forever. So I tried. I cooked Sunday dinners even when Vanessa criticized the way I seasoned the chicken. I babysat Lila even when Vanessa never said thank you. I loaned them money when Daniel lost a job, even though it meant pawning Harold's watch, the only thing of his I had left. Every sacrifice I made, I told myself it was for family. Family was supposed to be worth the pain. But family, I learned, can also be the knife in your back. The signs of Vanessa's disdain grew clearer as time went on. She started excluding me from decisions. School choices for Lila, financial discussions with Daniel, even holiday plans. I'd show up to their house with gifts and she'd roll her eyes like I was a nuisance. Daniel noticed, but he never spoke up. He'd squeeze my shoulder gently as if to say, "Mama, please understand." And I did. I understood he was caught between love for his wife and loyalty to his mother. But understanding doesn't make the hurt any less sharp. When Daniel's illness came, it exposed everything. Suddenly, my sacrifices didn't matter. I wasn't being asked if I was strong enough to give a kidney. I wasn't being asked if I wanted to. No, Vanessa made it clear that in her eyes I had no choice. "It's your duty," she said. Those words still echo in me. Duty. Like I was a soldier in her war, not a woman with her own fragile body. You see, betrayal doesn't always arrive like a thunderstorm. Sometimes it seeps in like a slow leak, drop by drop, until the whole house collapses. That's what Vanessa was. A slow leak in the foundation of my family. And Daniel, my sweet boy, was too tired, too blinded by love, to see the water rising. And then there was Lila. 10 years old, with eyes like the river at dawn, Clear, searching, impossibly deep. She was the only one who saw me, really saw me. She'd curl up beside me on the porch swing, resting her head on my shoulder, and whisper secrets about school, about her dreams, about how sometimes she felt invisible too. In her small, trembling voice, I heard the echo of my own younger self. Maybe that's why I loved her with a fierceness that scared me. She was proof that my sacrifices hadn't all been swallowed up. Little did I know it would be Lila, not Daniel, not anyone else, who would stand up for me when my world was about to collapse. She would be the small, bright candle in a room full of shadows. And in those days before the surgery, as I shuffled between Daniel's bedside and my own quiet house, I kept asking myself one question: how much more of myself do I have to give before someone says, "Enough, Margaret. You've done enough"? But no one said it. The silence was louder than any words. I didn't know it yet, but that silence was about to be broken. Not by a doctor, not by Vanessa, but by the tiny, trembling voice of a child who refused to let betrayal win. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic, that sharp, sterile scent that clings to everything like it wants to erase the memory of pain. Machines beeped quietly around Daniel's bed, their rhythm steady but fragile, as though reminding us how thin the thread of his life had become. I sat in the corner chair, my hands clasped together so tightly my knuckles turned white. I prayed silently, though I wasn't sure what I was praying for: strength for Daniel or courage for myself. Daniel lay there pale and exhausted, his face thinner than I'd ever seen it. Every now and then his eyelids fluttered open, but he barely spoke. He looked like a shadow of the boy I once rocked to sleep, the boy who clung to my hand at Harold's funeral, promising me in his little voice that he'd be strong for Mama. Now he was the one needing strength, and I would have given him mine, if only it hadn't been demanded of me like a debt. Vanessa stood by the window, arms crossed, her reflection caught in the glass. Her voice cut through the silence like a blade. "The doctor said you're the match, Margaret. This isn't complicated. You need to do the surgery, and you need to do it soon." I turned my head slowly toward her. The words stung, not because I wasn't willing, but because of the way she said them, as if I were a tool being summoned, not a mother trembling over a decision that could cost her life. My lips parted, but no words came out at first. I was too stunned by her coldness. Finally I managed, "Vanessa, I need to understand the risks. I'm 68 years old. My body isn't what it used to be. I want to help Daniel, of course I do, but shouldn't the doctors?" She cut me off, her voice rising. "Don't make this about you. He's your son. What kind of mother hesitates when her child is dying? You raised him, you said you'd do anything for him. Well, here's your chance. So don't start whining now about being too old or too scared. This isn't about you, Margaret. It never has been." Her words landed like stones in my chest. I turned to Daniel, desperate for him to speak, to defend me, to tell her that I wasn't just a body waiting to be carved open. His eyes opened weakly, and for a moment I thought he would. He looked at me, lips trembling, then closed his eyes again without a word. That silence, heavier than any insult, broke something inside me. If betrayal had a sound, it wasn't shouting. It was silence from the one you loved most. I tried again, my voice shaking. "Daniel, honey, I want to help you. I need to know you want me to. Not her. You." His lips moved, barely audible. "Mama, please." That was all. Just please. It wasn't a request, it wasn't protection. It was desperation, hollow and weak. And in that single word I heard the truth. He wasn't asking for me. He was begging me not to fight Vanessa. My throat closed up. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. Vanessa stepped closer, her heels clicking against the floor, each step like a hammer driving a nail deeper into my resolve. She leaned down, her voice low but dripping with venom. "If you back out, Margaret, it'll be on your conscience when he dies. Everyone will know his own mother let him go. It was a trap, and she knew it. A mother's guilt is the strongest chain of all, and she wrapped it tight around my neck." The doctor came in then, clipboard in hand, his tone brisk and professional. "We'll schedule the procedure for the morning. You're the best match. We don't have time to waste." He spoke as if I weren't even in the room, as if my body already belonged to them. Vanessa nodded firmly, sealing the decision before I could open my mouth. I sat frozen, my breath shallow, my palms damp with sweat. In that moment I felt like a prisoner signing her own sentence. My chest ached with fear, but deeper than that was a sharp, bitter wound. The knowledge that my son, my only son, had let his wife speak for him. I looked at Daniel again. His face was turned away, his shoulders trembling faintly under the hospital blanket. Maybe he was crying. Maybe he was pretending to sleep. I'll never know. What I do know is that his silence thundered louder than Vanessa's demands. That night, when the lights dimmed and visiting hours ended, I lay in my own hospital bed, staring at the ceiling tiles above me. I thought of Harold, of the promise I made to raise Daniel with all the strength I had. And here I was, old and brittle, about to give away a part of myself because love had twisted into obligation. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Lord, if this is my time, let it not be in vain." But even as I prayed, a whisper of unease crept through me. Something about Vanessa's urgency didn't sit right. The way she pushed, the way she looked almost eager. It gnawed at my gut like a rat in the walls. And yet I pushed the thought aside. Because at the end of the day, Daniel was my son. And I was his mother. And what kind of mother hesitates when her child is dying? Still, the seed of doubt had been planted. And soon it would grow into a truth so ugly, it would tear my family apart. The night before the surgery I couldn't sleep. The hospital bed felt like a slab of stone, cold and unyielding, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw the bright glare of surgical lights and heard the metallic scrape of scalpels being laid out on trays. My heart pounded in my chest like a drum that refused to quiet, each beat reminding me that time was slipping away. Tomorrow morning I would give up my kidney, and maybe my life, because my son was too weak to fight and his wife was too strong to resist. A nurse had come in earlier to check my vitals, her voice soft but her eyes avoiding mine. It was as if she knew I was walking toward something dangerous but didn't have the authority to stop it. People talk about hospitals being places of healing, but lying there in that thin gown, I felt more like livestock waiting for slaughter. I turned my head toward the small chair in the corner of my room and saw Lila curled up there, fast asleep. She had insisted on staying with me, though Vanessa had rolled her eyes and muttered something about spoiling the child. I didn't care. That little girl was the only anchor keeping me from drifting completely into despair. Her soft breathing was the only sound that soothed me in the quiet, sterile dark. But then just past midnight I woke to a whisper. "Grandma, Grandma, are you awake?" I blinked, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. Lila was leaning over me, clutching something tightly in her hands. Her little pink phone, the one I'd seen her carrying around like a treasure chest. Her eyes were wide and her voice trembled with urgency. "I saw something," she whispered, glancing nervously at the door. "On Mommy's phone. She left it open. I think you need to know." My stomach knotted. I reached for her hand, my fingers trembling. "What is it, baby?" Lila hesitated, biting her lip. Then she showed me the screen. I could just barely make out the glow of text messages. My eyesight isn't what it used to be, but I didn't need to read every word to feel the weight of them. Vanessa's name was at the top, and below were lines of text, cold, calculating. "Doctors say she's high risk. If she doesn't make it through, I'll still get the insurance. Either way, I'll be covered. Daniel will be too weak to argue. Funny how her sacrifice might solve all our problems." My breath caught in my throat. My vision blurred, not from my poor eyes but from the tears that rushed forward. I felt like the floor had opened beneath me. Vanessa didn't just see me as a burden, she saw me as a payout. "Grandma," Lila whispered, her voice breaking, "I took pictures. I saved them. I even recorded her talking on the phone. She said it would be easier if you didn't wake up." I didn't know what to do. But I couldn't let her hurt you. I stared at my granddaughter, this fragile child with trembling hands who had just carried a truth heavier than she should ever have to bear. My chest ached with both terror and pride. She was just 10 years old, but she had more courage than anyone else in that house. "Baby," I whispered, pulling her close, "you did the right thing. You're so brave. But you can't tell anyone yet. Not until the right moment. Do you understand? It has to be where everyone can hear." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. We sat like that for a long time, her small body pressed against mine, my heart racing with fear and fury. Fury that Vanessa would gamble with my life for money. Fury that Daniel, my own son, was too blind or too weak to see the kind of woman he had married. And fear that even with this truth I might not make it out alive. When Lila finally drifted back to sleep in the chair, I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. The beeping machines around me sounded less like monitors and more like ticking clocks, counting down to the moment of betrayal. I thought about Harold, how he used to tell me, "Maggie, storms always break no matter how long they linger." But this storm wasn't natural. It was man-made, brewed from greed and silence, and I wasn't sure it would ever pass. As dawn crept through the blinds, painting thin lines of gold across the hospital floor, I felt the weight of the day pressing down on me. Today was the day. Today I would either save my son or lose myself entirely. And yet, deep in my bones, I knew something had shifted. Vanessa thought she had written the ending to my story, but she hadn't counted on a child's courage. Still, as they came to wheel me toward the operating room, my heart sank. Because even though Lila held the truth in her small hands, the question remained, would anyone believe her in time? Morning light poured through the tall hospital windows, soft and golden, but it felt more like a spotlight than a blessing. The day had arrived. Nurses moved briskly through the hallways, pushing carts, checking charts, adjusting 4 bags. Their footsteps echoed against the linoleum floor, and with every sound my chest grew tighter. Today they would take me into that sterile white room and cut into me. My hands shook under the thin blanket, though I tried to hide it. Vanessa breezed into the room around 7 o'clock, her heels clicking like the march of a general leading troops into battle. She wore a crisp blouse and held a designer bag, her hair pinned back as if she were heading to a business meeting instead of her husband's bedside. Her face was composed, her voice sharp with authority. "The doctors are ready to move forward. We need this done. Don't start getting cold feet now, Margaret." Her words were a knife twisting deeper. I glanced at Daniel, who lay frail and pale in the bed beside mine, tubes and wires surrounding him like vines strangling a tree. He didn't speak. He didn't even look at me. His silence screamed louder than Vanessa's commands. But I wasn't as alone as she thought. Lila sat quietly at the foot of my bed, her small hands hidden under her sweater. I knew what she was holding, her phone filled with the evidence she had gathered. Screenshots of texts, recordings of late-night calls, proof that Vanessa was more interested in life insurance money than saving lives. My granddaughter's eyes, wide and watchful, flicked from her father to her mother to me, as though she was weighing the danger of every moment. She didn't speak. He didn't need to. I could feel the storm inside her, small but fierce, waiting for the right moment to break. "Vanessa," I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady, "you've made your feelings clear. But this isn't just about what you want. This is my body. My life. Shouldn't we wait at least until—" Her eyes snapped to me, sharp and cruel. "Don't start playing the martyr now. Daniel doesn't have time. Every hour we waste, his body gets weaker. You want that on your conscience." Her words struck me hard, but in that same instant Lila shifted closer. Her tiny hand brushed against mine under the blanket, a secret touch of reassurance. I looked into her eyes, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a flicker of strength. Because she knew. And I knew. And Vanessa had no idea the ground beneath her feet was crumbling. The doctors arrived shortly after with their calm, clinical tones, speaking as if everything was already decided. Papers were placed in front of me, waivers, consent forms, lines where I was expected to sign without question. My hands trembled as I held the pen, my vision swimming with doubt. I thought of Harold's watch, long gone to pay Daniel's mortgage. I thought of the decades I had spent serving others until nothing was left of me but bones and willpower. And now they wanted even that. As I hovered over the line, Lila leaned in and whispered so quietly only I could hear, "Grandma, don't be scared. I have everything. I'll show them when it matters." My throat tightened. My brave little girl, carrying a secret heavier than her small shoulders should ever have to bear. She was like a candle lit in a dark cave, fragile but powerful enough to push back the shadows. I squeezed her hand beneath the blanket, and in that moment something shifted inside me. Vanessa thought she had me cornered. She thought I was too weak, too guilty, too motherly to resist. But she hadn't counted on Lila. She hadn't counted on the truth waiting like a loaded gun in a child's pocket. For the rest of the morning I stayed quiet, letting Vanessa bark her orders, letting the doctors assume compliance. I saved my strength because I knew something she didn't. The storm was coming and it wasn't mine to unleash. By noon they were preparing to wheel me into surgery. The straps on the gurney felt like shackles as they secured me. My heart thudded heavily, my breathing shallow under the weight of fear. I turned my head to catch one last glimpse of Lila before the doors closed. She was standing by the wall, her fists clenched around her sweater, her jaw set in determination. Her eyes locked on mine, and I knew she was ready. For years I had been the one protecting Daniel. I had been the shield, the provider, the sacrifice. But now it was my granddaughter's turn to be the warrior. She would protect me even if she had to take on her own mother to do it. Vanessa smirked as the gurney rolled forward, her heels clicking alongside the wheels. She thought victory was in her grasp. She thought the last obstacle was about to be cut away. But what she didn't see, what she couldn't see, was that a 10-year-old child held the power to unravel her entire plan. And as the operating doors swung open, I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer. Lord, give Lila the courage I don't have. Because deep down I knew the truth. My fate was sealed. But hers was just beginning. The operating room was colder than I expected, almost cruelly so, as though the air itself wanted to drain the warmth out of me. My skin prickled under the thin gown as nurses moved around with practiced efficiency, adjusting monitors, placing 4 lines, murmuring medical terms I couldn't understand. The surgical lights above me glared down like unblinking eyes, merciless and bright, and for the first time in my life, I felt smaller than my own shadow. Take a deep breath, Mrs. Willis, a nurse said gently, adjusting the mask in her hands. Her voice was kind, but her eyes slid past me, focused on the rhythm of procedure rather than the storm of fear inside my chest. I wanted to say something, to protest, to ask for time, but my throat tightened. Vanessa stood near the corner, her arms crossed, her face sharp with impatience. She looked less like a worried wife and more like a supervisor waiting for her order to be fulfilled. She caught my eye and gave a tight smile that felt more like a warning. And Daniel, my poor boy, he wasn't even here. Too weak to be moved, he had been left in his room. I was alone, surrounded by strangers, about to give away a piece of myself for a son who no longer had the strength to stand up for me. Outside in the hallway, faint through the heavy doors, I heard a sound. At first it was muffled, like the cry of a bird caught in the wind. But then it grew louder, more insistent. A child's voice, trembling but fierce. Wait, please, don't let them. You have to see this. My heart skipped. That was Lila. The nurse with the mask frowned, glancing toward the door. Is there a child out there? She muttered. Vanessa's face darkened, her lips pressed into a thin line. She stepped quickly toward the door, her heels striking the tile like gunshots. Ignore her, she snapped. She's just scared. This is between adults. But the voice came again, clearer this time, filled with urgency that pierced through the sterile quiet. She's lying. Don't let them do it. My mommy wants Grandma to die. The room froze. Even the steady beeping of the machines seemed louder in the silence that followed. The nurse holding the mask hesitated, her eyes flicking to the anesthesiologist, then back to me. My heart thundered so violently I thought it might burst through my chest. I wanted to sit up, to scream, to rip the 4 from my arm, but my body felt heavy, pinned by fear and exhaustion. Vanessa's voice sliced through the tension, sharp and commanding. She's a child. She doesn't know what she's saying. Get on with it before this turns into a circus. Her words were poison, dripping into the air, but they couldn't cover the sound of small fists pounding on the door. I have proof. I have it right here. Lila's voice cracked with desperation, but it carried a power that no adult could summon. The anesthesiologist stepped forward, his brows furrowed. What does she mean, proof? Vanessa stiffened, her face pale beneath her makeup. It's nonsense. He's confused. She shouldn't even be here. But her composure was slipping. I saw it. The flicker in her eyes, the tightening of her jaw. For the first time, Vanessa didn't look in control. She looked afraid. "Please," I rasped, my voice barely more than a whisper. "Let her in." The nurse hesitated, then nodded toward the door. Within seconds, the heavy doors swung open and there she was. My granddaughter, her cheeks flushed, her hair wild, clutching her little pink phone like it was a sword. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, her eyes darting from me on the table to the doctors and nurses surrounding me. And then she turned toward Vanessa, her voice shaking but clear enough to slice through the silence. "Don't listen to her. She wants Grandma dead." I heard her say it. I recorded it. She said if Grandma didn't wake up, she'd get the money. Gasps rippled through the room. The nurse lowered the mask slowly. The anesthesiologist's eyes narrowed, his hand frozen over the monitor. Everyone turned toward Vanessa, whose face had gone pale as paper. For the first time since this nightmare began, the power shifted. Not because of me, lying helpless on the table, but because of a 10-year-old child who refused to let the truth be buried. My heart swelled with both fear and pride, my throat thick with tears. In that moment, I realized something. Strength doesn't always come from age or sacrifice or blood. Sometimes it comes from the smallest voice in the room, shouting the truth when no one else dares. And as Vanessa's mask of control began to crack, I knew this was only the beginning. The storm had finally broken, and the truth was about to flood every corner of that room. The air in the operating room was suddenly heavier, as though the very walls were holding their breath. Lila stood there, a trembling child in sneakers, clutching her pink phone like it was a holy relic. Her face was streaked with tears, but her voice carried with a force that even the hum of machines couldn't drown out. "She wants Grandma dead," she cried again, louder this time. I heard her. I recorded it. She said if Grandma didn't make it, she'd get the money. The words rang out like a gunshot, ricocheting off the steel cabinets and white tiles. For a moment no one moved. The nurse still held the mask in her hand, frozen mid-step. The anesthesiologist stood stiff, his eyes narrowed. Even the steady beep of the heart monitor seemed to pause, stretching the silence until it snapped. "Don't you dare," Vanessa hissed, her voice sharp and trembling. She lunged forward, her hand snatching for the phone, but the nurse stepped in between, blocking her path. "Stay back," the nurse said firmly. Lila pressed the phone to her chest, her little body shaking but unyielding. "I have proof," she whispered, then lifted the phone high. With trembling fingers she tapped the screen, and suddenly the room filled with Vanessa's voice. Calculating. Unmistakable. "If she doesn't make it through the surgery, I'll be fine. Daniel's too weak to argue and the insurance will cover me. Either way, I come out on top." The recording echoed through the sterile air, each word slicing deeper than any scalpel. Gasps erupted from the nurses. The anesthesiologist turned sharply, his face a mask of disgust. The surgeon, who had been preparing instruments, set them down slowly, his hands stiff with shock. All eyes turned to Vanessa. Her skin drained of color, her lips trembling as she stammered, That's not what it sounds like. She's twisting things." But her voice faltered. Because the truth was laid bare, undeniable, like blood spilled on a white sheet. I lay on the table, weak and trembling, tears pooling in my eyes. My chest ached with both horror and relief. Horror that my daughter-in-law had been willing to gamble with my life. Relief that the secret was no longer hidden in the shadows. That my granddaughter had dragged it screaming into the light. The surgeon spoke at last, his voice hard. "This surgery is suspended immediately. We're not proceeding under these circumstances." Vanessa whipped toward him, her voice breaking into shrill desperation. You can't just stop. He'll die if you stop." But the surgeon didn't waver. "We're not moving forward until this is investigated. This is no longer a medical issue. It's a matter for the authorities." Lila ran to my side then, clutching my hand with both of hers, her small fingers ice cold. "I told you, Grandma," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I told you I wouldn't let them hurt you." I turned my head, my eyes meeting hers. For the first time since Harold died, I felt a fierce spark of hope. Not hope for myself. My body was old, my strength fading, but hope for the bloodline that came after me. This little girl carried the courage of generations. Vanessa, meanwhile, was unraveling. She paced the corner of the room like a caged animal, her hands flying as she tried to spin lies faster than the truth could catch them. This is ridiculous. She's a child. You're really going to believe a 10-year-old with a phone over me? She doesn't understand. The nurse's voice cut through her rant like a blade. We believe the recording. And frankly, we believe her more than you. Vanessa's face crumpled, the mask of control she had worn for years shattering into pieces. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, but no one came to her defense. Not the doctors. Not the nurses. Not even Daniel, who, though weak and distant in his bed down the hall, could not have shielded her now. The doors burst open as security arrived, summoned by a nurse. The sight of uniformed men stepping into the sterile white room felt like the final nail in the coffin of her power. Vanessa backed away, sputtering excuses, but it was no use. Her betrayal was no longer hidden whispers in the dark. It was evidence, hard and undeniable, playing on a child's phone for all to hear. As they led her away, her heels clattering against the floor in panicked rhythm, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My chest rose and fell with relief, but also with sorrow. Because the battle wasn't over. Daniel still lay dying. And no matter how dark Vanessa's heart had been, no truth could change the fact that my son's body was failing. But for now, at least I was safe. For now, the scalpel would remain on the tray. And for now, the small voice of a 10-year-old had defeated the coldest betrayal I had ever known. The room emptied slowly after the storm broke. The surgeon stepped out first, his gloves half peeled, his voice clipped as he muttered about paperwork and liability. Nurses followed, whispering to each other in low tones, their eyes darting between me and the door where Vanessa had been dragged away. The last to leave was the anesthesiologist, who shut off the machines with quiet clicks, as if he were dimming the lights on a stage after a disastrous performance. Then it was only me and Lila, her small hand wrapped tightly in mine, anchoring me to the world. My body trembled, not just from the cold but from the weight of everything that had happened. My throat ached with unshed tears, and though I tried to be strong for her, I felt like a brittle branch ready to snap. Through the open doors, I saw Vanessa struggling against the security guards, her shrill voice echoing down the hallway. This isn't over. He's lying. You'll regret this. But her words fell flat, bouncing against walls that no longer cared to listen. A few minutes later, Daniel was wheeled into the room, pale and fragile, his head drooping to one side. His eyes were glassy, his face sunken, and for a moment, I barely recognized my own son. He looked older than his years, beaten down by both illness and betrayal. "Daniel," I whispered, reaching for his hand. My fingers brushed against his, thin and cold. He blinked slowly, his lips parting. "Mama, what happened?" His voice was faint, weaker than the hum of the machines around us. I wanted to shield him from the truth, to spare him the pain of knowing the woman he loved had been plotting against both of us. But there are some truths too heavy to hide. Lila, still holding my hand, leaned closer to her father, her eyes shining with both fear and defiance. "Daddy," she whispered, "Mommy wanted Grandma to die. I heard her say it. I showed everyone." The words cut through the silence like glass breaking. Daniel flinched, his eyes closing tightly as though the truth itself was too bright to bear. His chest rose and fell in ragged breaths, and a tear slid down his cheek. "No," he murmured, shaking his head weakly. "Not Vanessa." "Yes," I said softly, my own voice trembling. "She wanted the insurance money. She didn't care about you. Or me. She only cared about herself." For a long moment he said nothing. His face crumpled, his lips quivering as the truth clawed its way into his heart. Finally, his shoulders shook and he whispered, "Mama, I'm so sorry. I should have protected you. I should have seen." I squeezed his hand, though my strength was fading. "Don't be sorry, baby. You've carried enough pain. This was never your fault." But in my heart, sorrow weighed heavier than the words I spoke. Because it was too late. The surgery had been stopped and the doctors made it clear. My body was too fragile for another attempt. And Daniel's time was running out. Lila climbed into the chair beside him, clutching his arm. "Daddy, please don't cry," she whispered, her little voice breaking. "We still have each other. We still have Grandma." Daniel looked at her with hollow eyes, then back at me. "I don't have much left, do I?" Tears slid down my cheeks. I couldn't lie. "No, son," I said softly. "But you have us. You have love. And no one can take that from you." He nodded faintly, closing his eyes as more tears spilled. His body trembled under the thin blanket, frail as paper. And for the first time since he was a boy, I saw him not as my grown son, but as the child I once carried in my arms, fragile, scared, looking to me for comfort. Lila pressed her face into his chest, her sobs muffled against the hospital gown. My heart ached watching them, knowing the days ahead would only grow shorter. Outside, the chaos of Vanessa's downfall continued. Police arriving, papers being signed, questions being asked. But inside that quiet room, all I felt was the hollow echo of betrayal. It was like standing in a house after a fire. The walls still standing, but everything inside reduced to ashes. I stroked Daniel's hand gently, whispering words only he could hear. "I love you, baby. Always. No matter what." His lips trembled, and though his voice was barely audible, I caught the words, "I love you too, Mama." For a moment that was enough. Not the surgery, not the betrayal, not the lies. Just those 3 words, fragile and fleeting, like the last flame of a candle before it goes dark. The days after the operating room confrontation blurred into one another, marked not by hours or minutes, but by the steady beep of machines and the soft shuffle of nurses' shoes. Time in a hospital doesn't flow the way it does in the world outside. It stretches, it drags, and then suddenly it disappears, leaving you wondering where it went. Daniel grew weaker with each sunrise. His skin turned sallow, his cheeks hollowed, and his voice became little more than a whisper. Dialysis kept him alive, but barely. I sat by his bedside every day, my fingers brushing his, afraid that if I let go, he would slip away faster. Lila stayed close too. She brought her school books into the hospital, curled up in the corner chair with crayons and pencils scattered around her. She tried to be cheerful, humming softly or showing Daniel her drawings, but the light in her eyes dimmed a little more each time she saw him struggle. She was only 10, but grief had already laid its shadow across her young face. One afternoon, as the sun cast long golden bars across the floor, Daniel turned to me with tears in his eyes. His lips trembled as he whispered, "Mama, I let you down." My throat tightened. I leaned closer, smoothing the damp hair from his forehead. "Don't you say that. You didn't let me down. You're my son. You'll always be my son." He shook his head weakly, his hand trembling as it tried to grasp mine. "I should have stopped her. I should have told her to leave you alone. I was so tired, Mama. I thought keeping quiet was easier. And now," his voice broke and his chest heaved with a fragile sob, "now you almost died because of me." Tears spilled down my cheeks as I pressed his hand to my lips. "Hush, baby. Hush. You don't need to carry that weight. You've carried enough already." Lila climbed onto the bed beside him then, her small body curling against his weak frame. "Daddy, it wasn't your fault," she whispered. "You're still my hero." Those words broke something in me. A child's innocence, clinging to love even when the world around her was crumbling. It was both the most beautiful and the most heartbreaking thing I had ever witnessed. Daniel's eyes filled with tears as he kissed the top of her head. "You're stronger than I ever was," he murmured. "Promise me you'll take care of Grandma. Promise me you'll stay brave." Lila nodded, her little chin wobbling as she fought back tears. "I promise, Daddy." In that moment I felt the weight of both past and future pressing down on me. I had spent my life protecting Daniel, giving him everything I had. And now, as his body failed, the torch was passing to a child. A fragile, flickering flame, yet bright enough to keep the darkness at bay. The doctors did what they could, but the truth was unavoidable. Without a transplant, Daniel's time was short. And I could not give it to him. My own body was too frail, too worn by years of sacrifice. That truth cut me deeper than any knife. Each night I sat in the stiff hospital chair, watching him breathe, counting every rise and fall of his chest like they were borrowed treasures. I prayed not for miracles. I had learned not to bargain with God, but for mercy. Mercy for my son, mercy for my granddaughter, mercy for the small pieces of me still clinging to hope. One night, when the machines hummed softly and the world outside was dark, Daniel stirred and whispered, "Mama?" "Yes, baby," I said, leaning close. "Will you forgive me? For not speaking up? For letting her?" He couldn't finish, his voice breaking under the weight of regret. I pressed my forehead to his hand, my tears soaking the thin skin. "There's nothing to forgive. You're my son. I love you. That's all that matters." His breath shuddered and he gave the faintest smile. "I love you too, Mama. And I'm so glad. Lila has you." Those words, his last gift, lodged in my heart like a seed. Painful, yes, but also carrying the faintest promise of growth. Because even in the shadow of death, love had taken root. In those final days, Lila and I leaned on each other like two broken branches twisted together by the wind. Fragile, yes, but somehow stronger for it. And as I watched my son fade, I realized that betrayal had taken so much from me, but it had also revealed the truest bond of all. A grandmother and her granddaughter, clinging to each other against the storm. The day Daniel took his last breath, the world outside carried on as if nothing had changed. Cars rolled down the street. The sun shone through the blinds in warm golden lines. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the faint laughter of children walking home from school. But in that hospital room time stopped. His chest rose once, twice, then stilled. The steady beep of the monitor stretched into a single note, sharp and unrelenting, until a nurse quietly reached over and silenced it. My son, the boy I raised through grief and poverty, the man I had sacrificed everything for, was gone. I pressed my forehead to his still hand, my tears falling freely. The warmth was already leaving him, slipping away like sand between my fingers, no matter how tightly I held on. I thought of Harold, gone all those years ago, and for a fleeting moment, I imagined them together. Father and son reunited somewhere my arms couldn't reach. Beside me, Lila clung to my sleeve, her sobs soft but steady. She was only 10, yet grief had etched itself into her so deeply it broke my heart anew. I pulled her close, wrapping her in my arms, and whispered, "We'll carry him in us. Every day. He's not gone as long as we remember." The funeral came a week later. Savannah's sky was overcast that morning, the kind of gray that feels heavy on your shoulders. The church was small, wooden pews worn smooth by years of hands and sorrow. The smell of lilies filled the air, too sweet, almost suffocating. Family friends came, neighbors too, but there was an empty space where Vanessa should have been. By then she was entangled in legal battles, stripped of her power, her mask of respectability shattered for good. I walked down the aisle slowly, my hand resting on Lila's small shoulder. People whispered, some with pity, some with judgment. But I didn't care. I wasn't there for them. I was there to lay my son to rest, to close a chapter written in both love and betrayal. The pastor spoke of Daniel's kindness, his laughter, the way he had once been full of promise. I listened, tears sliding silently down my cheeks. And though I mourned, I also felt a strange peace. Because in the end the truth had been revealed. My sacrifice had not been swallowed by lies. My granddaughter had ensured that. When the service ended, we walked to the cemetery. The ground was damp beneath our feet, the air heavy with the scent of rain. As they lowered Daniel's casket into the earth, I gripped Lila's hand tightly, both of us trembling. A single bird cried out overhead, its call thin and haunting, as if the world itself mourned with us. Afterward, back at the house, I sat in Harold's old rocking chair with Lila curled against me. The porch creaked beneath us, the same as it had for decades, a reminder that some things endure even when hearts break. She looked up at me with tear-streaked cheeks and whispered, "Grandma, are we going to be okay?" I kissed the top of her head, my lips lingering in her hair. "We're broken, baby," I said softly, "but broken things can still shine. We'll be okay because we have each other." And I meant it. Vanessa had taken so much: trust, security, the life of a man who deserved better. But she had not taken everything. She could not take the bond between me and my granddaughter. That bond, forged in fire, was stronger than her betrayal. As the days turned into weeks, I found strength in small things. The morning light on the river. The laughter that sometimes escaped Lila when she forgot her grief for just a moment. The rocking of that old chair carrying me forward, creak by creak. Life had carved deep wounds into me, but it hadn't destroyed me. Betrayal had been the knife, yes, but love was the stitch that kept me from falling apart. So now, as I share my story with you, I do it not for pity but for truth. Because families can wound deeper than strangers ever could, and sometimes the ones you trust most are the ones who betray you. But even in the darkest storms, there can be light, even if it comes from the smallest hands holding a phone, speaking the truth no one else dared. Thank you for listening to me. Don't forget to subscribe and please share your story in the comments below. Your voice matters. And maybe, just maybe, telling it will set you free too.